Okay. Good morning. Welcome to Las Vegas. This is originally geared for a presentation, but we're kind of going to have to wing here a little bit of chalk and hopefully fill the gap. And hopefully I can make this thing for a few hours. It might be a little difficult. Anyway, let's talk a little about VLANs. VLANs and Nbase. VLANs and Nbase right now, I think, is one of the issues we kind of dance around. It's one of probably the most undersold feature sets that we have in a lot of our switch product line. I think the fundamental problem is that a lot of people don't understand VLANs. Not to say that you don't have to understand VLANs from a technical perspective, but let's take a look at it from an application point of view and a sales opportunity point of view. And I think you'll see, and based on some of the existing installations that we've done using VLANs, of how much better, how more competitive you can be going in with a solution instead of walking in there with just a simple box solution, if you would. I think to fully understand and appreciate the benefit and power of VLANs, let's just take a real 5-minute tour back and let's take a look at what a real network is. And we'll understand the benefit of a VLAN as we go forward. If you take a look at a VLAN, what's a network? What's a very, very basic network? And what are we in the business of doing?
Together.
Bart.
Polish network, one modem.
Got it. Yeah, let's think about that curve for grading the test again.
A network is you're sharing devices. That's the simplest way. You have you share devices on one piece of wire.
That's right. We basically take multiple PCs, multiple clients on a single piece of wire and we share that. What are some of the downfalls of a network like this? What are the things that we've been avoiding? What are we selling around? When we go into a
Congestion, collision.
CSMA, CD, collisions, things like that. So basic network, we know what some of the real problems are in a basic network. Ethernet was designed in such a way that we didn't really care about congestion issues and things like that because no one ever thought that they'd be running over the performance requirements that they'd ever need or something like that. What kind of utilizations can we see on a shared network like that? If we take a look at a signaling speed of either 10 megabits or 100 megabits, from a percentage point of view, what's the best to utilize? A copper, like say we've got maybe 100 stations sitting on this.
30%.
30 to 40% is about all we can ever expect to get out of a piece of wire like that, no matter what you're doing. I could have 2 clients sitting there talking, maybe getting 70% utilization. That third client enters that CSMA CD stream. Bingo, you're down to the 40% region and it falls off dramatically below that. You get up into several hundred stations on a shared piece of Ethernet like that, the utilization drop down to 800 kilobits per second very easily. So here comes Nbase, the box solution. We put a nice little box in here called an Nbase switch. What's the Nbase switch do for us? This is all about, this is flash car stuff.
Dedicated port.
Dedicated port. We can now break up the individual segments on the Ethernet. Everybody has a complete and dedicated connection to the network. There are no CSMA CD issues. Completely remove that part of the standard now. So that everybody has a complete dedicated domain. What are my network utilizations now up to? Quickly, flash cards.
Wire speed. Wire speed.
Pardon?
Wire speed.
Wire speed. What's wire speed?
You can speed of backbone. Speed of your backbone.
Speed of your backbone. What's the speed of your backbone?
Backbone.
Come on, Bob. Come on. Network utilizations.
We're talking about.
Network utilizations approach somewhere in the 90% region. We're never going to see 100% utilization because of interframe gaps, delays, and things like that. Inherent to the protocol itself. It's Ethernet. So never see 100% utilization, but you can see utilization somewhere in the 90s. That's in a perfect switched world. In other words, one protocol on there, one broadcast domain, typically all clients and one server. We don't introduce any other variables in that network. You can still approach network utilization up there. Still a dramatic performance improvement. Let's take a look at the more complex network. None of these networks that we install and the level of networks that we're going after today are simple networks. Granted, we'll get into small work group types of opportunities and things like that, but even the small network opportunities are quite complex. You're running into mixed protocol situations. You're running into situations where you're not just TCP/IP. You'll have a mix of chatty protocols and AppleTalk thrown in there. You'll have IPX all over the place. And you have these rogues floating around with Windows 95 running NetBEUI. Extremely chatty. So now let's take a look at the perspective from chatting protocols and what happens in a normal Ethernet. What happens, I have this server connected over here. This PC is turned off. When I turn him on, what's the first thing that goes on after he boots and loads the stack? It's the broadcast. Okay. All right. By nature, what happens to a broadcast when it gets one switchboard of a switch? Everywhere. Broadcast storm city. It's not a broadcast storm with respect to ingestion on an individual segment, but it's unnecessary broadcast traffic distributed over the entire switch network. If you've got well, it could be any hierarchy of switches. It could be a single switch. It could be point-to-point. If I broadcast here, that broadcast is probably be down my trunk, hit that switch, that same broadcast will basically flood the entire network. So from a switch utilization point of view, CPU utilization point of view, that's extremely unnecessary. Okay? So one of the things we can do is we can sell around situations like that. You walk into a situation, college campus, university opportunity, you see anywhere between 500 and 5,000 clients that are out there. Some of those routed, some of those not. And those that are not routed, well, they're big mess. Those that want broadcast control, performance improvement, but not necessarily wanting to do the routing, you can walk in there with a very, very effective solution using VLAN without any additional cost for the base box itself. That's an inherent piece of the puzzle there. Same thing goes on with multicast. Any kind of broadcast or multicast traffic. Say, for instance, it is a college university. I've got my regular academic server here, client server application running here, but all of a sudden, they want to plug in a video server and start running applications like real video. Or maybe they might want to take an audio feed from a classroom, real audio. Those are multicast types of broadcasts, if you would. What they rely on is a one-to-many scheme. This multicast traffic wants to switch. The switch is really going to treat that stream no different than it will broadcast. When the multicast hits that port, that same packet architecture is broadcast every single port in the entire switch. So one multicast stream in the entire network can basically flood that entire switch architecture. Christian?
Sorry to drag you through now, but can you quickly summarize multicast for me?
Okay. Multicast is a scheme where you basically, it's very much like a broadcast packet, but it has content carrying capabilities. In other words, you can actually fill the data field, which you use multicast primarily for. More recently, in college applications, you have feeds from servers, things like that. Now they use multicast instead of having to rely on unicast packets. You take a multicast, which is one-to-many. If I were to try and take and service 500 users on the same video stream using unicast packets, I don't have enough switching horsepower. In other words, I'm having to do CRCs for every single session, every single connection across that switch. Multicast basically is one-to-many. I don't really have to have acknowledgments back from that either. Basically, once I get that switch, that multicast traffic goes to the individual clients that are out there.
Is it protocol independent, meaning it's not relevant to IP or IPX? You can support multicast connection in any of those protocol environments?
It's prevalent in IP utilizations, IP multicast. There are other protocols that are similar to multicast, but using different network protocols. But by and large, 99% of the opportunities that we're going to be exploring are going to be IP-based.
Thank you.
And the big driving force behind the IP side of the house is MBone, multicast backbone. It's a service provision primarily for colleges and universities that will do interactive studies and distance learning. They might take one classroom up at MIT, send one unicast stream down to Woods Hole Oceanographic. At that point, it's hopped over to a multicast server, and locally on the campus, they'll take a broadcast out of multiple multicast sessions to the individual users. Before, you would have to initiate multiple multicast or multiple unicast streams all the way back up to MIT across the backbone. But now with MBone in place, it's one unicast session to a multicast server, and it's fanned out locally on the campus. Okay. So basically, that's one of the first benefits of establishing a VLAN is in broadcast control. This is in basically most of the boxes Nbase has. Now we're going to explore some of the differences in some of the boxes that Nbase touts. We're going to see different levels of broadcast, different levels of broadcast control, different levels of security VLANs, different policy-based types of VLANs. Mark.
Okay, the whole 9 yards, how does that relate when it comes down to when someone wants to go out and basically set up a boot P session, the whole 9 yards? I mean, that's a unicast or a multicast?
Boot P is a specific protocol.
Okay.
That is totally irrelevant to VLANs, multicast, unicast.
If someone turns themselves on, they're going to broadcast a boot P request.
That's right. That boot P request without filtering is going to propagate over the entire switch.
Okay, that's one. So SVLAN can press a secure virtual LAN that will restrict where that boot P request goes to?
Basically, if you nail up an SVLAN, the boot P will still propagate over the entire switch. That's why we have a separate broadcast control mechanism in the switch. In other words, once you nail up an SVLAN that includes a certain number of ports, you can also nail up a broadcast domain to match that, or you can do a subset of that and basically create smaller broadcast domains within the SVLAN to do that. So you might want to create a VLAN just for servicing your router, your network management, and loading stack parameters and things like that. So you can carve out a separate SVLAN just for back-end traffic or control traffic. All production traffic you move over onto another pipe for that. So what is VLANs? Maybe not necessarily from a technical perspective, but let's just take a look at it from an applications perspective. A VLAN is nothing more than the formation of a logical network, independent of geography, independent of physical layout, independent of the number of nodes or number of sites that you might have in a facility. A logical network is basically a network reduced to a cloud. And that cloud basically has so many numbers within that cloud. Now, this cloud can be subdivided physically in very different domains. I can have VLAN A coming from that area over here, but I might have 2 users sitting at this table here, also part of VLAN A, going over an interswitch VLAN trunk, which we'll get into more detail a little bit later on. But it allows people to overcome the barriers of the physical layout of a particular facility. You might have human resources in a business that they don't have the luxury of all setting together. You might have 4 or 5 of them sitting on the 5th floor, 2 human resources workers that want to see within their own domain, only have their own server, things like that, but they can live well up on the 11th floor on another switch. Still be totally isolated from the rest of the community from a security point of view. From a sales perspective, what are VLANs? We've been selling boxes, we've been selling plumbing, we've been selling speeds and feeds. And granted, a lot of our marketing literature and maybe past sales direction is said to do that. But let's leverage the real capabilities of the box. From a sales perspective, if I go into a college or university, or a CLEC, an RBOC, major opportunities, hospital organizations. Mr. Customer, I can walk in there and I can give you gigabit Ethernet out the yin-yang. I can have 100 zillion 10100 ports. But you really don't add anything to the pie until you say, this is what I can do with it. You know, all of your medical imaging applications can share the same backbone as your administrative traffic, which in the healthcare industry, that's a big no-no. Those are separate infrastructures. You can walk in there with a unique solution. Here's a common fiber plant solution. Here's all the bandwidth you need. Here's the security you need to do this with. You know, that's been unheard of in networks before unless they're sitting on top of big fat routers that are doing this, megabytes. But you can walk in there with a switch under your arm, very modestly priced, and do roughly the same thing by sharing the same backbone. A lot of strong vertical market opportunities. Nailing out, let's talk about education. We're going to share some examples that we've been successful in installing. And VLANs at that particular time of the sale was a differentiator. Put a focus on the technical application side of the house. These VLAN capabilities, that basically closed the deal. Even though we thought these were going to be mega opportunities with gigabit Ethernet, and that was going to be the driving force, that had to be byproducts. It was the VLAN aspect of certain applications that we worked on that actually sold it. We still sold gig, we still sold a lot of other things. Yeah.
So most of the competitors offer VLANs. What I'm not hearing is, do we do something different than they do with the VLANs?
Tim, repeat the question so it comes out for you.
Question was, are we doing anything different than what the competitors are doing? We have VLANs, they have VLANs. From a technical perspective, again, very little differences. There's different methodologies, different proprietary methods. You know, Cisco may use one method, Nbase may use a standard basing method like 802.1q. So on the technical side of the house, very little different. They're delivering a user from this VLAN group to a user within the same VLAN group in another switch from the building. I just don't think that anyone on the market is really going after the application side of the house. In other words, creating that vertical drive to push those types of solutions that are out there. We've got to get out of the mindset that we're pushing this basically nothing but boxes and plumbing. In other words,
We're not talking about it. We're not selling it.
let's start thinking about the vertical motivation. In other words, let's go in there and thinking like the school administration guy. Let's go in there and talk about the hospital network administrator. What some of his process. If you go in there solution savvy to his type of problem, then you're going to have a big leg up. And I can't think of anybody's sales approach. I've been in a lot of opportunities where we've been competing with big guys like Cisco and 3Com. And they stopped short by not really fully exploring what their view can do either. And I think we can be one leg up by saying, this is what we can actually do with the VLAN. The imaging system, the CAD system. You don't have to spend the money for separate infrastructure. Let's put in one fiber plant. We'll give you dedicated bandwidth resources for all your administrative support. And they let it all up together. We can do cross-platform. In other words, have a single client operate as a administrative interface. In a rush, you can still modify the VLAN map to attach the imaging machine and download images off the CAD system. This is basically distance connectivity. One of our resellers, large Bell operating company, has installed a large hospital network. Right now it's a flat network, but they install that basically knowing where they're going to go with the VLANs. And right now there's one large administrative network. They're just starting to get into some of the pure medical applications to ride that same backbone. In order to do that safely, they're going to carve out different VLANs, put the CAD systems over there, put cardiology imaging in another area, basically share the same sheet of glass on all sides. This particular network we've installed over the past 6 months. It passes right now about 25 physical sites. They all have Nbase switches between us.
This is the one application that you can take to the telcos because you're not competing. You're allowing them to offer a service that they can pair up. And we're going to take this into their new parent, SBC, but I mean, every telco ought to take the same application and duplicate it.
That's right. Steve?
The 82 dollar is that normally released in the market?
That's tight, right? That's tight.
Question was, is 802.1q been officially released to the marketplace? First of all, let me just explain 802.1q. 802.1q is called the Interswitch VLAN Vector Standard. It basically defines how a particular packet is tagged. If I have two switches talking together, so there's no link between the two. I think it's a good time to explain a little bit of terminology too. When you refer to VLAN connectivity in a switch network, it's no longer ports and uplinks. Basically in VLANs, if you would, these are now called edge devices or edge nodes or edge ports. These are called trunk ports because in the situation where these two switches have to pass along inter-switch VLAN information, this trunk has to basically adhere to a certain protocol.
We're doing LI signal right there.
Yeah.
Right there.
We've installed and delivered a lot of 802.1q based solutions.
With the 2012 and the United VLAN box.
That's right.
Which is the box that supports the
That's the only box right now that supports it.
Was the
GFS
GFS 312.
3012 supports 802.1q.
But anyway,
Okay, in this scenario here, for me to accurately map a VLAN cloud like this, if I have these two users sitting down here in this particular VLAN, and I want to map them over here to the same VLAN at the remote side, within the box itself, I don't necessarily need 802.1q. I can map those right in the switch itself as part of the same member group. But in order to extend that VLAN definition over to another switch, there has to be some handshaking to go on between the switches and also some tagging information in the frame itself. Basically, there is a tagged frame that gives you the switch identifier and also the port map for that particular switch. Not necessarily the port map is transferred in our case, but just basically the VLAN identifier. That'll map the policy information based on MAC address versus the port information the trunk and is transferred over to the switch. But a lot of mumbo jumbo means they can talk to them.
And that also then means that if there are, when you go into a larger installation, it has existing switches, they could potentially be upgraded to 802.1q, that might be a system box, and you drop a couple of Nbase switches in there, that's 4802.1q. Supposing that they will
Mark,
talk
isn't
to
it
one
on?
another and allow you to set
Is
up
it on?
virtual LAN as the customer wants to set up, regardless of whether it's an Nbase switch or a system.
That's right. Statement from Steve was that the interoperability basically has to do with interoperability issues. If you go into a multi-vendor environment, you can't walk in there under your arm with a method of attack VLAN packets.
You mentioned there were you have the choice of you set up the VLAN by a Mac or a port. I mean, those are the two,
Well, yeah.
theoretically, all right? Or combinations of those.
Yeah, we can get into the actual methodology of how we can set up policies a little later on. But there are multiple ways of doing it. By and large, 90% of the Nbase line is all port-based VLAN. Only the 3012, we get into different methods of setting up VLAN policies based on source and destination addresses, 802.1q groups. I don't know where we stand personally yet, but what I'm hoping is that we can get into some IGMP support, IGMP snooping, group support, things like that. But we know for sure that it's going to be 1Q, port-based, source and destination address. Source and port match. But we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Okay. Talk about broadcast control and VLANs.
Sorry,
Now,
one more information. How do you feel now about those pay 8200, old ones, new ones? The old ones are not playing 82.1. The new ones are playing.
as far as, in a lot of cases, we're
Repeat
going
the question, we didn't hear.
What was the question?
basically, there's a statement, he says, that basically what he's seeing in the marketplace, that some vendors that are out there have older product, they're moving into 802.1q, but not necessarily all their iron can be upgraded to 802.1q. So you got to be very careful as to say what you're interoperable with. You might have two products with the same part numbers, one's a little bit higher rev than the other one. You got to be very careful in determining what can talk to who. You got to ask some very specific questions. Of course, you tap your SE resources to ask these questions for you. And doesn't talk 802.1q. It's not to say that you can't reposition that network topology to make the older boxes work, because you can always take the older boxes, hang them behind an edge port, and let them become one large VLAN, still utilizing the switch pattern. So there's ways more ways to skin that cat.
You said today that GFS 12 and 2012 are the only ones that support this.
Right.
Are there plans that you know of to expand that to other products?
I take that back. Everything that's based on the Megaswitch 2 engine supports port-based VLAN. That also includes the
2015, 2048.
which is the 12-port 10-base T. This is the Megaswitch uplink. Oh, Stan, feel free to jump in any time.
But not to 2610, right?
2016 is not made, any product made out of Israel, there's two major families. The Megaswitch 2 family, which comes out of Chatsworth. Their products are 2015, 2012, or now the 2012R and the 2048. They're all based on that same engine, which can take all the modules based on the 2012. So the 2015, the 2048, 2012 works very similar to each other. Now the thing you have to be very wary of, the 2048 does not have true port-based VLANs because it doesn't have true switch ports. But you still can do VLANs on that puppy.
On the 24-year.
Yes.
Right.
But you have to do it with the back-end switch ports.
Right.
And they also support that 801.q with the uplink module.
Yeah.
And remember, the 100 megabit is only fiber optic, no TX for transferring the packets. And the gigabit.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan.
This may exist already, but I haven't found it yet, and